And all, the first item on the agenda is roll call. Are we ready? Or if I cut you off guard?
Mr. Parker,
Here.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Here.
Mr. Gibbs,
Here.
Ms. McMahon,
Here.
Mr. Olmstead,
Here.
Mr. Stevenson,
Here.
Mr. Van Stone,
Here.
and Chairman Raybould.
Here. Okay, Mr. Patton, agenda. Are we all set? Does there anybody have any changes they want to make to the agenda? Okay, I think we're good. Did anybody happen to peruse the minutes that were sent out?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comment. Do we have members of the public who wish to address us? Okay.
We needed one. We need something from John.
No, I talked to him. He's saving up.
And I don't see anybody online that wishes to address the board yet.
Okay. All right. Next up is the financial report. Is that Neely?
Yes. Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Take me a second here to pull up my material. Right, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As of May 31st, 2023, the board's available and committed balances are as follows. In the secondary aquifer fund, the board has a committed earmark but not dispersed balance of approximately 18.8 million. An uncommitted balance of roughly 14.2 million. In the revolving development account, the board has a committed earmark but not dispersed balance of roughly 34.9 million. A loan principal outstanding of roughly 17.4 million. An uncommitted balance of about 2.8 million. And anticipated movable funds over the next year of roughly 6.3 million. The water management account. The board has an obligated balance of approximately 112 million and an unobligated balance of roughly 182.5 million. Taken together, these three accounts, the board has a total committed earmarked obligated but not dispersed balance of roughly 165.7 million. A total loan principal outstanding of about 17.4 million, and then a total uncommitted, unobligated balance of 199.5 million. In regards to the ARPA, the board has committed per House Bill 769 approximately $100 million. The board has an obligated balance of approximately 17.3 million, an unobligated balance of roughly 8.4 million. Then the board has expended a little over 74 million. Just a couple notes here. The obligated balance in the water management account includes the $20 million legislative appropriation from fiscal year 2019, and that's for the Anderson Ranch enlargement and/or Mountain Home Air Force Base. Water supply project. The obligated balance also includes 50 million for large infrastructure projects per Senate Bill 1121. That was from fiscal year 2021. For the Anderson Ranch, Mountain Home Air Force Base, ESPA managed recharge aquifer, and then other projects. The water management account has an obligated balance. Unobligated balance includes 75 million per House Bill 769 to be used for the expenditures, loans, and/or grants for water projects, including studies to address water sustainability, rehabilitate or improve aging water infrastructure, support for flood management. And again, the legislature said that no more than 1/3 of these monies could be used for grants. At the September 22 board meeting, the board authorized 12.5 million in funds for aging infrastructure grants. That was round one. And then at the January 2023 meeting, the board authorized another 12.5 million for aging infrastructure grants. That was round two. The water management account unobligated balance also includes the 150 million per House Bill 1181, and this is to be used for expenditures, loans, grants, or water projects, including studies to address water sustainability, and or improve aging infrastructure. And the legislature provided that the board may provide up to 1/3 of these monies for grants. Lastly, in FY 2023, $72.8 million was expended from ARPA funds for the Anderson Ranch Reservoir. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Hey, board members, any questions for Neely? Joanne?
Mr. Chair, Neely, on the revolving development account, the committed but not dispersed, are those signed agreements but just without draws? The 34.9 million.
Yes,
Are any of those agreements aging more than a couple of years?
which ones are these in?
In the committed, earmarked but not dispersed in the revolving development account. I'm wondering if we're tying up a lot of the money in loans that are not actually being loaned out. They're not taking draws for the loan. And if any of them are aging past a couple of years.
I think we're tracking those pretty well now. And I think we're following up after about a year and a half.
Okay, thank you.
So do those applicants periodically update staff as to the status of their project, or do you?
They do, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Neely.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda.
Next on the agenda is Priest Lake Outlet Dam modification. And I think Mike Morrison is going to be on Zoom and give us
There
that
he is.
update and present a couple of resolutions for you.
Good morning, Mike.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good, good. That's not always the case from this, but okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, board members, Director Spackman, I have a brief update on the status of the outlet dam project, and as already noted, I will be presenting two resolutions. The first of these resolutions will provide funding for our construction manager through the end of construction, and a second resolution funds the cost of continued litigation through the end of the trial date that's come up for February. So project status: in June, I went up and visited the dam, held pre-bid conferences with two pre-qualified contractors, and they're currently developing bids to complete work on the out dam. We plan to present the results of these bids and request money to fund construction at a special session in August. I also met with adjacent landowners to secure access agreements needed to complete the dam. And while I was up there, I checked the dam. The dam is still stable. There appears to have been no apparent changes since my May visit to Priest Lake. And we are still on track to complete the dam by April 2024. I've included a more detailed timeline in your briefing memo. Let's see. So to summarize, I'm going to ask you today for two resolutions. One will provide funding for our construction manager, and the second will fund litigation. Okay. In August, we're going to come back and actually ask for the funding to fund the contractor who will actually complete the construction. And if all goes planned, that will be the last time I come to you asking for funding for this project. That is my real hope.
Promise.
Is that a promise?
Oh, heavens, I wish it were. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. First of all, we've got the funding for engineering services for the construction, for our construction manager. Since August 2020, the firm of Mott McDonald has provided engineering and construction management services for this project. These services include regulatory and permitting support, project management, provision of an on-site engineer, review of pay applications and other submittals. And I'd also note that Mott McDonald designed this project, and they are also the design engineer of record for it, or the engineer of record for it. So staff recommends that Mott McDonald continue providing engineering and construction management services through the end of construction. Estimated costs of providing these are $483,110. And staff is requesting that the board authorize $500,000 from the water management account to cover the costs of engineering and construction management services through the end of construction. And that would also provide us a small contingency fund. Does the board have any questions?
Any questions for Mike? Okay,
The chairman, Mike, is that With Mont McDonald, you deal with the same people, they have a change, a different personnel.
These are going to be the same actual people who've been involved with the project since actually before 2020. Prior to that, we had them do a study on the dam, and they did some design work for us. So it'll be the same folks.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and move that we approve this resolution to have Mont McDonald do the oversight of the outlet dam.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote.
Mr. Barker,
Aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs,
Aye.
Mr. McMahon,
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead,
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson,
Aye.
Mr. Vanstone,
Aye.
and Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Okay, Mike. What's the next on the list?
Okay, I've got more good news for you. During yesterday's executive session, Deputy Attorney General Megan Carter updated you on the status of litigation with Strider. In Resolution 01-2023, the board authorized expenditure of $370,000 to fund its outside counsel, Curtin McConkie, through the end of this year. I'm through May of this year. I'm sorry, through May. So at present, we've only got about $20,000 of unobligated funds left of that. And we are back asking for more money to fund this all the way through litigation, the completion of litigation at the end of February. Curtin McConkie has estimated that litigation costs could run as much as $815,000. That's a high-end estimate through trial. So staff is presenting a resolution authorizing expenditure of up to $815,000 from the water management account to defray the costs of Strider litigation. Resolution can be found in the Priest Lake tab of your materials. And does the board have any questions for me?
Well, board members, any questions for Mike? Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Mike, not a question, but if you have to go up with another tedious, time-consuming inspection sometime, I'll volunteer to go with you.
I would be happy to have you. If we can go back up there and take a look, and I'm sure we're going to have a few more opportunities here before April of next year when this darn thing will be done.
Okay,
And a huckleberry pie.
I move to approve the resolution for funding outside counsel.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, we have another roll call vote. Jennifer?
Mr. Barker,
Aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs,
Aye.
Mr. McMahon,
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead, Mr. Stevenson,
Aye.
Mr. Vanstone,
Aye.
Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, any other good news, Mike?
No more good news for this. If I may, I'd like to proceed to give you a very, very quick update on the Mountain Home Air Force Base Water Resilience Project.
Oh, okay, yeah, it just happens to be next on the list, so let's move right into that.
I think that would be a good idea. Okay, so I'm promising not to ask for any more money today. So today I won't ask you for any more money. I just want to give you an update on what we're doing with the project. We recently completed the first step of a two-step process to select a qualified design build firm who will design and build an inlet, pumping station, and 14.4-mile pipeline from CJ Strike Reservoir to Mountain Home Air Force Base. In the first step, a 5-member evaluation committee completed its review of statements of qualifications from 3 design build firms. All 3 firms were found to be qualified. During the second step, all 3 qualified design build firms will be invited to submit proposals and bids for designing and building the project. We anticipate awarding the design build contract in November. Now, having said that, today is the day that we're going to be sending out the request for proposals to these firms. So I think we're going to be able to do that today. Let's see, we've been working on getting easements. That has proven to be quite time consuming. We've had a lot of work and a lot of effort on getting easements from the Bureau of Land Management, Mountain Home Highway District, Idaho Transportation Department, and the Idaho Department of Lands to get the necessary easements, rights of ways, and permits to build the project. That is going apace. And then as for the Air Force, they are planning to, and they haven't committed to a firm date, but they're going to be submitting proposal, or they're going to be soliciting proposals for design build firms who will build the water treatment plant at Mountain Home Air Force Base. And they anticipate awarding that contract this fall. And that's all the update I've got for the Mountain Home project. Do I have any questions from the board?
Questions for Mike? We'll go over here, Mark, and then, okay.
Mr. Chairman, best case scenario, when will I be drinking water from the treatment plant?
Best case scenario could be as early as fall of 2025. Our target date to actually have the thing completely up and running, qualified, and totally passed over to the Air Force is January 2026.
Thank you.
Al?
Chairman, Mike, is there any update on the cost estimates? Since you aren't asking us for any money today.
We do have an update on the cost estimate. And I could provide that to you. I would prefer not to, since we've got this out for bid and we don't really want to tilt our hand, if that would be okay. Yeah, but if you would like that information, I can provide that to you.
I'd rather see the bids.
Okay. We'll see those sometime at the late October, early November.
That will be probably a better estimate when you get the bid.
I think you're right, sir.
Okay, all right. Anything else you have for us, Mike?
I do not have anything for the board.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and you folks have a very good day.
We will. Okay. We're still okay for a while? Okay, all right. Next up, Lost Valley, Galloway subordination.
Yes, Cynthia will be giving that update, Mr. Chairman, and then she will have a resolution for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Yes, we have the Lost Valley topic. I think you all are familiar with the dam raise proposal, and I think we'll be talking about that project in more detail later today in conjunction with the regional sustainable water projects priority list. But the agenda item that we need to discuss right now under this agenda item is to consider a request from the Lost Valley Reservoir Company to modify the terms of a resolution that the Water Board passed back in 2020. You do have some materials under your, which Jennifer is going to share with us shortly. Some materials under, I believe it's under agenda number 7. And those include a memo, a request from the Lost Valley Reservoir Company that I'd like to discuss, and a possible draft resolution for your consideration. So as background, the Lost Valley Reservoir Company, again, this project involves potentially repairing and raising a dam to increase the capacity of the reservoir by as much as 20,000 acre feet. Back in 1982, the Water Board filed a water right application for a proposed project on the Weezer River involved a large storage project that's been called the Galloway project. And 11 years later, the Lost Valley Reservoir Company filed an application that was in 1993 for a water right for this increased storage at the Lost Valley Reservoir. So that application that was filed by the reservoir company was actually protested at that time by the Forest Service, and those protests have not been resolved to date, but that application sits with the Department of Water Resources today. The reservoir company did reinitiate development activities related to this project back in 2013 and has been working on that since. And in 2020, it approached the Water Board about with some concerns about the conflicts between the two water right applications. So it ultimately, the reservoir company requested that the board consider subordinating a portion of its Galloway water right application to the Lost Valley water right application, so that it would not, I guess, potentially impact in the event that both projects were developed, would not impact the ability for the reservoir, Lost Valley Reservoir, to fill that new space. The Water Board acted on that request in 2020, and it actually passed a resolution. It was July 30th, 2020, so almost a week to the day today, 3 years in a week. Authorizing subordination of up to 20,000 acre-feet of the Galloway water right application to the Lost Valley application, provided that the reservoir company was able to demonstrate due diligence in developing the project. And the resolution set forth 3 conditions. Yeah, I think we got those up there. Thank you. So the first condition required that the reservoir company, within 3 years of the date of the resolution, that it advance coordination with the Forest Service to initiate the EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. Second condition required that the Lost Valley Reservoir Company ultimately secure a water right permit with the Department of Water Resources. And the third condition required that construction of the project be completed within 10 years of the date of that resolution. And finally, the resolution also allowed for application or request for extensions of time by the reservoir company, provided that it could demonstrate the cause and due diligence in trying to progress the project. So today, or let's see, I think back in mid-July, the Water Board staff requested input from the reservoir company about the status of the project, and they did provide a letter to the Water Resource Board. And I believe that's a little later in our materials. You all have that in your package. The reservoir company provided a letter to the board dated July 11th. Detailing some of the project development activities that have occurred since that resolution was passed, and requesting modification of that resolution to provide an extension to that condition 1 to add an additional 3 years for ongoing efforts to initiate the EIS. So we have a staff developed a draft resolution for you to consider, but at this time, I'd like to just recognize that Mr. Doug Jones is with us today, representing the reservoir company. If you all have questions about the steps and the activities that the company has taken to advance the project, or if you want to discuss that further before we discuss potential resolution. So I will stop there and ask if the board has any questions.
Board, do you have any questions? Mr. Jones, you have any comments? You're okay?
No, I'm okay. Things are going our way. Go right ahead.
You'll be okay if we take action, though. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair,
Joy.
Mr. Jones, did you read this resolution and the conditions that, because the new conditions are slightly different than the old conditions?
Mr. Chairman.
Maybe go to the mic. Go to the wrong.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Chairman, Member Cole-Hansen, I have to say personally, I have not read the resolution. But I think we have shown the due diligence in this material we sent. The history that Cynthia just went through predates my involvement in the project quite a bit. But it's a project that's been ongoing for a long time. The chairman helped broker the subordination agreement 3 or 3.5 years ago. We have not, Forest Service has not lifted their objection, but with the action of the Finance Committee here a few days back, we have initiated, in fact, prior to that, we had initiated conversation with the district forest ranger. This is the 3rd ranger we've had just since I've been involved in the project. So we're working with them. We will meet with them shortly in the next 10 days, 2 weeks to talk to the Forest Service. We hope are going to approve some funding for us at a later agenda item. We think we're moving forward with the project very nicely. But to answer your question, no, I personally have not read the resolution. Other folks in our consulting group have, the chairman of the board has.
And they have no objections to the. In particular, in item 3 on line 79 states that construction must be, or I'm sorry, item number 2 on 76, line 76. Within 10 years, construction must be completed within 10 years of the original date of the resolution, which would have been July 2020. Okay, I just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
Madam Chairman, yes, we are aware of that. Part of the material we have submitted has a project timeline in it. We would like to have water in the new reservoir in 26, which would be well within our 10 years. If there's anything that we anticipate might hold that up, actually it would be the Forest Service, because they're notoriously slow in their process of working through this. We've already contacted after we had a standing Monday morning call. We talked with our EIS contractor on Monday morning. We've already talked with our engineering firm to update their plans that were done in 21. And the EIS contractor is headed off to Washington to do a site visit on another Forest Service contract. Said if he could arrange his travel to drive, he would come back through New Meadows, try to set an appointment to meet with the district ranger. That would be within the next 10 days. So we're working on it diligently and would anticipate our timeline. I may say 25, but 26. The Forest Service might be the piece that holds this up because they're slow to get things done. But yes, we should meet the 10-year timeline pretty comfortably, I think.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chairman, I have really more a question for you. Given Mr. Jones' comment about funding opportunities, should we hold off on this until we see if his funding request is approved?
Well, I would assume that they would like to have a continuance of this subordination option, whether or not they get the funding that's proposed later in the agenda.
In that case,
Either way, I assume they made the request for this, so I think that's independent of what funding action we might take.
in that case, I would move to approve the resolution.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay,
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Cynthia, thank you, Mr. Jones. Flood management grant awards. Back to Neely.
Yep, back to Neely, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I just would like to highlight here that at the end of my brief presentation, you'll be asked to consider adoption of attached resolution. The flood management grant program has now been around for a number of years. It's annually, the deadline is the first Friday of June. This year you received 13 applications. Staff evaluated, scored, and ranked the projects according to the board's criteria. The finance committee reviewed these at their July 12th meeting and recommended the attached resolution for consideration by the full board along with the funding of the projects. And we can scroll to that briefly.
What, the resolution or
The projects, yeah.
Okay.
The attachment A to the resolution. And on the screen, you can see the recommendation for funding. Here it is. You can see that the board did hit the limit in Board District 3. That 50% cap. But you have 15% going to board district 1, 25 to board district 2, 50 to board district 3, and 10 to board district 4. And just to talk through that, you'll see that under the Twin Falls and City of Twin Falls, they had requested, I think, almost $60,000 because they hit the cap in District 3. The only funds that were remaining for District 3 were 5,914. So that's what is there for them. But then you move down below them and you can see that Idaho Soil Water Conservation District and the City of Victor both received their full request according to staff recommendation. So with that, I would stand for any questions on this ranking, and then there is an attached resolution to this attachment.
Any questions for Neely? Brian?
Mr. Chairman Neely, I did talk to Twin Falls Canal and City of Twin, and they're okay with the, the procedure was fair, and frankly, they they started too late to really develop this proposal perfectly, so I think we'll see them back again with working with you more to. It's a good project, but they was a little bit thrown together, and in my opinion, but they're fine with it.
Well, that's great news.
They'll probably save 5,000 to use with some more maybe, or do some planning on it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Neely? Tell you what. Do we need to look at the resolution for a bit, or we got it?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I move that we approve resolution, the resolution to award the 2024 grant funds, or flood grants.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded, any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote, roll call vote, please, Jennifer.
Mr. Barker,
Mr. Chairman, I will abstain on the Twin Falls Canal Company because of the firm client, and otherwise I vote aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs,
Aye.
Mr. McMahon,
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead.
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson,
Aye.
Mr. Van Stone,
Aye.
and Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Okay. Cloud seeding program is Kayla gonna be, oh, there's Kayla.
Okay, we'll be on by Zoom.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. How are you this morning?
I think we're all doing well. in
Wonderful.
Moscow, Idaho. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to try and be brief. Yesterday, I walked you through some budget items that I am requesting for authorization at this time. Today, I have that resolution to walk you through, and I do have one change to that resolution after some follow-up with Ann Rybar. I'm going to go ahead and share this on screen. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the total amount that you all had set aside this year in your secondary aquifer fund budget was approximately $7 million for the cloud seeding program. Today, I am requesting authorization for approximately $1.975 million of that $7 million, leaving just over $5 million set aside in the secondary aquifer fund account for the cloud seeding program. So today, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to start with the be it resolved, starting on line 16 of this resolution. The first item I am requesting authorization for is the $750,000 for a project to complete a statewide calibration of the wharf hydro model. The second item that I have on here is authorization of expenditures not to exceed $210,000 from the Secondary Aquifer Planning Management and Implementation Fund. For work to expand the wharf weather mod to cover the Lemhi and Bear River basins. Again, this work is necessary to get the model set up for operations and assessments. The third item that I have for you on here, Mr. Chairman, is going to be starting on line 24. Be it further resolved, the board authorizes expenditures not to exceed $100,000 for the purchase of computing resources to support existing and ongoing projects. And again, this is to support various current and potential future needs for computing as we are space limited right now, and staff are working to identify the most cost-effective resource to support projects. Mr. Chairman, the next item starts on line 28. The board authorizes expenditures not to exceed $450,000 for the deployment of a weather radar and the collection and post-processing of data to support a liquid propane pre-investigation and the update of modeling to potentially support liquid propane. The next item, Mr. Chairman, starts on line 32. Be it further resolved, the board is authorizing expenditures not to exceed $465,000. And this is for costs related to modeling to look at liquid propane to set up a full investigation. Mr. Chairman, the last item that I have for you is a modification from the resolution that you do have in your materials. The line did previously read that the board would authorize the remaining of the $7 million subject to the cloud seeding committee's approval. After some follow-up with Ann Raybould, it sounds like statutorily we may not be able to do that, so we will have to move forward with the board authorizing funds as needed. Again, there is a remaining just over $5 million. 2.3 million of that 5 million is for operations and maintenance, so that will not require further authorization, leaving about 2.5 million that will still require further authorization from you all for expenditure. So the modification that I made here was one that I failed to omit the first time, and this simply authorizes your board's executive officer to enter into agreements for this funding. So Mr. Chairman, that's what I have for you today on this resolution, and I would stand for any questions.
Board members, questions for Kayla? Mark,
Mr. Chairman, I move to adopt the resolution.
okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, is there any further discussion?
Chairman.
Yeah.
On the LES modeling, I guess I raised the question yesterday, whether or not we should be looking for partners to help us with that. That seems to be research and development type thing, and I don't know where that would, I mean, I know this is a not to exceed authorization, but I don't know what the timing would be, whether there's possibility of obtaining other, particularly academic or government interest in this that would be useful, particularly since this information can be made available to the public anyway. So I'm not sure I'm asking to modify the motion. I'm just saying I think it would be good if staff could be looking for additional assistance in moving that project forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, I will just note that staff are actively working with the state of Utah to identify potential cost share on this project. The state of Utah did set aside $10 million total for their cloud seeding program. I believe they have about $2 million set aside for research and development. I'm not going to allow anyone to quote me on that. I believe that's just an estimation, but they are interested in liquid propane. Some early climatology studies do show the biggest potential for liquid propane to be in the Bear River Basin. So they are definitely interested in investigating that region and the potential for liquid propane, just looking at the efficacy of it just as we are. So that's a potential option. Staff do have some meetings with them next week to discuss where they're at with research and funding. So the state of Utah may be one opportunity for this pre-investigation effort. For the full-on comprehensive study, there's certainly much more opportunities for partnership funding.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Barker, you'd be okay leaving the resolution as is with the direction to staff to continue to look for partners?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, then we'll proceed to vote on the resolution. Jennifer?
Okay, Mr. Barker,
Aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs,
I'd just like to make a brief statement in that I am a member of a very large class of Bear River water users and don't think I have a conflict. And we'll vote on this project, but I want that in the record that I am a member of a very large class of folks. And with that, I would vote aye on the motion.
Mr. McMahon,
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead,
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson,
Aye.
Mr. Van Stone,
Aye.
and Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Lemhi River settlement?
And Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to give a brief update on the exercise of the McFarland minimum stream flow water right that was scheduled for this June. As you recall, at your May board meeting, the board decided to exercise the McFarland minimum stream flow water right on the Lemhi River. That was established as part of the Lemhi settlement agreement. And that was based on the recommendation of the Lemhi River Basin Settlement Steering Committee to exercise that water right this year. To provide notification, our staff in Salmon did substantial community outreach. Based on that community outreach, there were some concerns expressed to both staff and to the Lemhi River Water Master about that exercise and potential property impacts. Based on those concerns, it was decided to not exercise the McFarland minimum stream flow water right this year, but to take a closer look at those concerns and whether those concerns, what might be behind those concerns, and if there are ways to deal with those concerns before the McFarland minimum stream flow water right is exercised. So that's just an update on what happened, and I thought that probably be best placed on the official record, Mr. Chairman, that minimum stream flow water right was not exercised after your direction to do so.
Okay, do we know what kind of flows there was in the Lemhi this spring at McFarland? Did we approach the target flow?
We were, Mr. Chairman, we're very close. The exercise of the McFarland minimum stream flow would have added an additional 125 CFS to the river. And concerns about adding that additional 125 with regard to property impacts is what led to the pulling back of that exercise this spring.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious how close we got without exercising, because if the flow in the river hits the target, whether we exercise it or not, it counts as one of the flushing flows for that 5-year period, as I recall.
I believe you're correct. We will have a better report from Amy here, sometime in the next few months.
Okay,
and we can circle around and provide that report to you.
any questions for Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Brian, are you talking about the property impacts in the form of flooding?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, yes, those were the concerns that were expressed to the both our staff and to the Lemhi Water Master.
Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Brian, so well, we didn't exercise the minimum flow right. Does that mean we did not pay the ranchers to leave the water in the stream, or that still went as?
So during the exercise of the minimum stream flow right, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, we don't actually pay the ranchers for the exercise. That's something a little separate when in the Lemhi River.
Yeah, Brian, this was part of the negotiated settlement in the Lemhi Basin, and the ranchers, the farmers, water right holders were able to establish a water right, a stream flow maintenance right for their high flow water, which previous to this settlement, they had a condition that they could divert the water, but they didn't have a water right. Now they have a water right. And in conjunction with getting that water right, they agreed to subordinate that water right to meet this target flow 2 out of 5 years. That's separate and apart from our transactions program that we run, where we pay people to voluntarily stop diverting to meet the flow targets in the Lemhi River. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll learn a lot on the tour, I think, in September.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Dean?
Mr. Chairman, I guess for Brian, is this going to be a problem ever exercising this right?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stevenson, that's one of the things we need to get a better handle on. if there were those concerns, during this high flow year, we need to understand whether those concerns would be there every high flow year. And whether those concerns have validity.
I believe that's the key. Do those concerns have validity? Because the river has had flows in excess of, I think it's 420 CFS on numerous occasions. And there was a lot of discussion about having this flushing flow. And all through the process, I don't recall anybody raising their hand and saying that there might be some property damage issues that we need to consider. I think this is something new that's been raised, and we probably just need to flush it out and see what we have there. But I still think the settlement agreement can be intact, and our water right will be valid to achieve those flushing flows. Okay, anything else on the Lemhi? We're good. Okay, Pinehurst Water District loan request.
Yes, Justin
There he
Ferguson
is,
from
yeah.
staff will lead off with that, and then we also have a representative from Pinehurst in the room here with us this morning.
Okay, Justin?
In with you guys in Moscow is Mr. Jeff Frank here for Pinehurst. But just a quick couple of things that I wanted to hit before questions. So we've got an $87,000 loan for Pinehurst Water District. This will be their third loan. They've had two before. The first to replace some wooden storage tanks they used to hold water for the municipal water right. And then later in 2015 for a backup generator for their system. This one will be to purchase additional parts for their system and replace some infrastructure that was burnt in a fire. So the 2007 loan was paid off in full. They've got two payments left on the 2015 loan for $100,000. The idea is once that one's paid off in those two payments, they can roll right into this one without any concerns. They've also offered from the county assessor their infrastructure that was valued at just over $3 million as security for the loan. So right now we're looking at a 3.57 CFS municipal water right, along with the real property at 3.8 million to secure the $87,000 loan. There doesn't look to be any concerns with revenue sources, and with those last two loans paid without any problem, staff recommends approving the application. Other than that, I can stand for any questions, or if Mr. Frank would like to step up.
Okay, Mr. Frank, would you like to make a few comments?
I don't have any comments. I'm just, if you had any questions.
Okay, board members, do we have any questions for Justin or Mr. Frank? Rather docile group here this morning. Ryan.
So we get your comps if you don't pay.
I'd like to retire, so.
Okay, I think we're probably okay.
I have one question. How many users do you have on your system?
We have about 850, 860.
And is this all, this is all municipal, just household water then?
Yes.
Okay.
And Chairman, there were two things I wanted to touch on quick before the resolution. The first is that the interest rate is set at an 8.25. It was talked about that the board doesn't refinance loans. The applicant was made aware, and that's acceptable. The other was that there was a question as to why we didn't apply for a aging infrastructure grant. And that's because this is a municipal water system, so they didn't qualify. Other than that, I think we can jump to line 30 in the resolution. Now therefore it be resolved that the board approves a loan not to exceed $87,000 from the revolving development account at an 8, and I've got to adjust that at an I was incorrect. This is an 8.0% loan. They were able to get their application in before the adjustment date in July. So this will actually be an 8% loan on 10 years for $87,000.
So it's gonna be a 10-year repayment, is
Yes,
that correct?
yes.
All right, any questions for Justin on the resolution?
Chairman, I move to approve the resolution.
I have a motion, I have a second, any further discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Jennifer, could we have a roll call?
Mr. Barker,
Aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs,
Aye.
Mr. McMahon,
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead,
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson,
Aye.
Mr. Van Stone,
Aye.
and Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion is passed.
All right.
You can go to work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the board,
Okay, you're welcome.
and all the work you've done, Justin.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for stopping by.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Okay. All right, next,
If we're still good.
are we still good? Do we need a break? Okay,
Next is the regional water sustainability projects, and we're back to Neely.
okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I just would like to highlight that at the end of this brief presentation, you'll be asked to consider 2 resolutions for approval. I'll start with just a little bit of background. Going back to July 2021, when the board adopted the initial regional water sustainability list to help guide the board's spending for large regional water sustainability projects from ARPA funds, state funds, and other applicable resources. Then in January of 2022, the board adopted a threshold criteria indicating that a project to be included on this list must help achieve water supply sustainability on a regional, basin-wide, or statewide basis. Then you'll recall back in October 26, 2022, the board adopted a criteria for inclusion of projects on the regional water sustainability priority list. That criteria included a process for how to be added, the types of information required to be submitted, and considerations for inclusions on the list. The board set a deadline of December 1 for requests to be submitted. The board received 15 requests to remain on or be added to the list. In January of 2023, the board updated that list. Then beginning in March 2023, the board authorized staff to solicit information, some additional information for prioritizing these projects. Then in May of 2023, the board authorized staff to solicit presentations from project sponsors. Those presentations took place at finance committees in June. So attached to this memo, staff has developed project funding recommendations, and this was done in consultation with the finance chair and the finance committee. The finance committee met on July 12th to discuss these recommendations. And I will walk through these. Attached to this memo is a funds available for regional water sustainability projects presentation that was put together by Mr. Patton, and he walked through that at the finance committee. And that really teed up 2 actions for the finance committee and then the board for consideration. One is to update the ARPA spending plan. And then secondly was to recommend authorization of funding for the projects in the attached spreadsheet. So with that, I would like to, I guess, move to the first resolution first, the ARPA spending plan resolution. Well, actually, I think it makes sense to look at the funding recommendations first. So let's go to the attachment to the second resolution. Sorry, Jennifer.
I don't know.
Just keep scrolling. It's
Second resolution.
there's 2 resolutions attached to this.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. And then scroll to the attachment to that. Here you can see that this is the funding recommendations that were recommended by the finance committee. You can see here that there's construction ready projects and all. The finance committee recommended that approximately 59 million be recommended for funding for those construction ready projects. And I would just highlight that there's 3 there from the city of Nampa totaling 6 million. The recommendation is for 3 million, which is half of their request, but it's listed under the one project there, the Nampa reuse pipeline. Additionally, there's the Lewiston Orchards Exchange project and the Mackey Dam repair. The Finance Committee chose to hold on those for now because there are some federal funding processes that need to play out, and the board did not want to get ahead of that. Moving on down to the planning level projects, you can see that there's 3 listed there. The board recommended funding for 2 of them. And then the Elmore County Mountain Home Aquifer Water Supply, they had just requested that the board consider their aging infrastructure grant application that they would plan to submit in the month of August. Now, I have heard that they've had some events that occur at that mountain home where they've had a cave-in of that tunnel, and so they may be pivoting and moving to a repair instead of a seepage study. So with that, it looks like the Finance Committee recommended approval of $742,500 for planning level projects, and then $59,466,556 for construction projects. I don't know if the board wants to discuss this ranking right now before we move to the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, Neely, it might just be a good idea to note that the American Falls Spillway and the New York Canal projects will be paid from the ARPA funds, while the remaining would be from the water management account.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Neely about the proposed list?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would suggest on that list is that the total cost of the American Falls Spillway rehab is listed as NA, but I don't remember what the total amount is expended. It's like 70 million, something like that. So as we're not fully funding all of the spillway rehab with the proposal.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, likewise, that North Fremont Canal System, this is their phase 5. They, with the help of NRCS, funded the first 4 phases and loans from us. So this just puts them over the hump to finish their project. I don't see any other questions at the moment, Neely, so I think we can proceed.
Okay, I think it makes sense to look at the ARPA spending plan resolution first. So there's 2 resolutions. If we could just scroll up to the first one. And I don't know, Mr. Patton, would you like to walk through this? I think you drafted this.
Yes. In January of 2022, the board adopted a spending plan for the use of the ARPA funds that have been both received and are scheduled to be received over the coming years. You are scheduled to receive a total of $250 million over a 4-year period in ARPA funds to be used for certain ARPA eligible water projects. And you had planned to allocate 195 of those ARPA dollars, 195 million, excuse me, those ARPA dollars, as shown there in lines 13, 14, and 15 on that resolution. 90 million to Anderson Ranch, 30 million to the Air Force Base pipeline, and 75 million to Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer recharge. On July 12th of this year, the Finance Committee reviewed that spending plan and recommended modification of that ARPA spending plan, as shown there, based on some updated cost numbers or projected cost numbers of 125 million to the Anderson Ranch Reservoir enlargement, $61 million to the Air Base pipeline, and $14 million to ESPA recharge. And what that means is that would allow $50 million of ARPA funds to be spent on other ARPA eligible water projects. As we discussed, that could include the New York Canal project and the American Falls Spillway project, and perhaps the Lewiston Orchards project at a future date. And what this resolution would do is adopt that recommendation to modify the ARPA spending plan from the Finance Committee.
Okay, any questions for Neely or Mr. Patton about this resolution?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve this resolution.
Okay, is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Let's have a roll call on this one. Let's do a roll call, Jennifer.
Mr. Barker.
Aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen.
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs.
Aye.
Mr. McMahon.
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead.
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson.
Aye.
Mr. Van Stone.
Aye.
And Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Back to you, Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving down to the second resolution. This will be for consideration of the recommended project funding that we just went over.
Give Jennifer a minute. She's multitasking.
So this resolution is fairly straightforward. It talks about House Bill 769 appropriating the $100 million in 2022. It talks about the appropriation of $50 million to the board's water management account fund projects identified on the list. Then it walks through Senate Bill 1181 from 2023, which appropriated $50 million of ARPA funds to the board to be used for certain ARPA eligible projects. And then again, in the legislature through Senate Bill 1181 appropriated $100 million to the board's water management account fund projects. Just walks through the history of the regional water sustainability list. You can see there in July of 2021 and then October of 2022. Then we get down to line 29, where there's 15 requests that were submitted to be added or to remain on the list. And then in May 2023, the board authorized staff to submit presentations. And then the July 12th Finance Committee, where the board Finance Committee discussed these recommendations and made a recommendation to the full board. And then as we scroll down to the next page, really the now therefore be it resolved that the board approves the award of funding for regional water sustainability funds as specified in attachment A to this resolution. And then lastly, the last now therefore be it resolved in the resolution says staff is directed to work with project sponsors on draft contracts for each of these projects, including appropriate terms and conditions, which shall be brought back to the board for approval before execution of each contract. So this will allow staff to really dig in and build in those terms and conditions, and then we will bring that back probably sometime this fall or winter, but there's not a specific timeline. It'll be as they move forward. And so you would get a chance to approve those before we move forward with the execution of the agreements. So with that, I will stand for any questions about these two resolutions or the project funding recommendations.
I think we had one typo.
Yeah, some of the whereases up front where Neely talked about the appropriated amounts needed to be cleaned up a little bit. But they don't affect the substantial action in the resolution.
So just so the board's aware that those will be cleaned up, correct? Correct. It's part of this resolution that we're going
Correct.
to take action on. Okay, any questions for Neely? Okay. Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the resolution.
Mr.
Joy?
Chair, I proudly move to adopt this resolution
Okay,
process that we.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Seconded by Dean. Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yeah.
will abstain from voting on the New York Canal and American Falls Spillway rehab project because it was involved client and I will otherwise vote aye.
Ms. Cole-Hansen.
Aye.
Mr. Gibbs.
Aye.
Mr. McMahon.
Aye.
Mr. Olmstead.
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson.
Aye.
Mr. Vanstone,
Aye.
and Chairman Raybould.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Let's proceed to notify these organizations and then work through as you've been directed. Okay, are we good to keep going forward? Anybody need a break? Okay, administrative rules update. Is that our favorite administrative rule guy? Here he comes.
Present.
Just give us this water.
Closes, what happens?
Just tell me what to improve.
Oh, yeah. My computer screen doesn't look dark.
Uh-oh.
That's been a trend.
We got a virus going around here.
Some bad juju in the room.
Just have to wing it and it would be a lot shorter. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I think just a pretty quick update here for you on our rulemaking. No action items for you today, but likely will be coming back before you, perhaps in August or late August, looking for some action by the board at that time. I last presented on the rulemaking for this year to you on March 31st, so it's been a while. We've got two ongoing rule negotiations at this time. Again, this is the third year of the governor's 5-year ZBR rulemaking process. And we're currently repromulgating our underground injection control rules, which are under the authority of this body, and then our water appropriation rules, which are under the authority of the department. And I'll take that second rule set first and just give you a quick update. We're well into that rulemaking process. We noticed it in April. We've had 2 negotiation meetings to date. We're planning the 3rd meeting. There have been several draft rules, and they're on schedule to submit a proposed rule for publication in October. That's being led by Angie Hansen, who's the current water rights section manager. The second set of rules that I mentioned, the underground injection control rules, again, that's under the authority of the board. And it too was published in April for rulemaking. They've had several public negotiation meetings and received several rounds of comments, and they're working on their 3rd draft rule at this time. I think I've mentioned to you at the last update that there's been more interest in this rule than I would have anticipated. We fairly recently did 2 rulemakings regarding our UIC rules in response to class 2 wells, which are oil and natural gas injection wells. So I thought because of the recency in that rulemaking, that perhaps there wouldn't be as much interest in this, but that hasn't been the case. So just a little background on these rules. They govern the construction and use of injection wells in Idaho. They apply to all injection wells. The rules define 5 classes of injection wells. Class 1 is deep hazardous and radioactive waste injection wells. Those are prohibited in Idaho under our rules. Class 2, oil and natural gas production waste fluid injection wells. Those are allowed in Idaho, but they are permitted and reviewed by EPA. Class 3 wells are mineral extraction waste fluid injection wells. They are prohibited in Idaho. Class 4 is shallow hazardous and radioactive waste injection wells. They too are prohibited in Idaho. And then class 5 is all injection well types not included in the other classifications. And this notably includes injection wells for aquifer recharge and injection through improved sinkholes. And then there's a 6th class, I guess, carbon dioxide geosequestration injection wells, which at this time are also prohibited in Idaho. So really, we just got class 5 wells being regulated under these rules. Class 2 wells are allowed, regulated by EPA. So Eric Bowe is the groundwater protection section manager. He's the person carrying out this rulemaking. And he's been coming to me over the last couple of weeks, giving me updates on an issue that's arisen during this rulemaking that we weren't anticipating. And it has to do with injecting recycled industrial or municipal wastewater in shallow and deep injection wells. And so I'm just going to read a synopsis from a communication he recently sent me. Idaho's groundwater is one of the state's most valuable natural resources. Groundwater from underground source drinking water aquifers, so that's defined in our UIC rules, is estimated to account for 92% of the state's potable drinking water supply.
Interest in injecting recycled municipal industrial wastewater into Idaho's USDW aquifers has been increasing over the last year with multiple projects proposed. The rise in interest has been driven by anticipated reductions to what municipal wastewater treatment facilities will be authorized to discharge via their MPDS permits. In addition to interest in managed aquifer recharge projects in area with limited or declining groundwater supplies. EPA drinking water standards were designed for water obtained from conventional, relatively uncontaminated sources of fresh water. Recycled municipal and industrial wastewater is considered an atypical source of water, since unlike most natural groundwaters or surface water sources, the quality can be highly variable, likely containing a term contaminations of emerging concern that are difficult to regulate. These can include industrial chemicals, unidentified halogenated compounds, pharmaceuticals, synthetic hormones, and certain pathogens. So that's the excerpt from the email that he sent me. So the current rule doesn't allow for the injection of recycled water. The proposed rule right now is contemplating allowing it in both shallow and deep injection wells. And the term recycled water is now being used 23 times in the rule. So there's a number of rules that are being contemplated that would govern this activity. So there's this idea of recharging with recycled water. We can do that at land surface. We can do that in shallow injection wells, which is anything shallower than 18 feet, or we can do that in deep injection wells. And when you're recharging at the surface or in shallow injection wells, there's typically environmental buffering that goes along because you're putting the water in the vadose zone or land surface or in a shallow unconfined aquifer. And so we have less concern there potentially than we do when we're injecting that deep into a confined aquifer that's also an underground source drinking water supply. So there's overlap on this issue between the department and the Department of Environmental Quality due to that nexus of water quality regulation, which isn't an expertise of our department. That's typically something DEQ does. This is one of the few places where we do have some overlap with it. So DEQ has rules governing water quality standards, groundwater quality rules, and recycled water rules. And importantly, their recycled water rules establish rules and procedures for issuing a reuse permit, which allows for groundwater recharge through the surface application of recycled water. So their rules don't speak to doing anything with that recycled water below land surface. So our UIC rules, Rule 35 and Rule 55 specifically speak to this idea of injecting recycled water through shallow and deep wells. Now, shallow wells, again, we don't have the same concern because of the environmental buffering that takes place, and also because there's language and requirements in DEQ's recycled water rule that I think will fit well with our rule. But we do have the concern with injecting recycled water in the deeper wells. So one way perhaps to approach this would be with a general condition that I would characterize maybe as a no net increase rule, which just says, whatever the contaminant of concern is, your injectate can't have a concentration level greater than the receiving water's concentration level. And that might be a way to move forward quickly. But we are getting a lot of comment from the stakeholders that they don't like the open-endedness of that type of rule. And so they're looking for more specificity, and maybe trying to avoid, I guess, just the vagueness that might come along with that. The problem with doing a specific rule that has a lot more detail is it will take longer to work through that. And we will probably need to recruit some expertise that we don't currently have at the department. And I have met with Gary and the deputy director at DEQ, Kristen Ryan, I believe, and we talked about this subject. So we are scheduling a meeting to bring together some of the leadership at both agencies to talk about moving forward with this issue. But to date, we've not had any meaningful participation from the EPA or DEQ on this rulemaking. So I don't know that I have a recommendation for you at this time. I think this is an issue probably that the board should have some interest in and engagement in. And one possible thing would be to tee this up for a presentation by our rulemaking team, who are the experts on this, perhaps in one of the committee meetings of the board, and to look to do that in August. And, following up on that presentation, have some discussion of what the next steps could be. I think if we were to go with the general rule, we could move forward with the rulemaking this year and have a proposed rule ready to go in October. But if there's not a lot of stakeholder support for that, the risk we run is when we get to the legislature, they might come in with alternatives, and then we kind of lose control of the process at that point. So that concludes my comments today, Mr. Chairman. Be happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Matt? Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Matt. The deep water injection you're referring to, is that water coming out of the oil and gas that you're trying to put back where it came from?
No. What this is this would be treated municipal wastewater or treated industrial wastewater. That would be, for those of you who are familiar with rules, would be treated to a Class A wastewater standard as defined in DEQ's rules, and then being put down a constructed well.
Okay, just for my clarification, the tour that we went on yesterday, they were meeting a Class B standard at the end of their process.
That's
So it
correct.
would be further refining and filtering to even be recharged or injected.
Right, and so they probably have a reuse permit for the, what I'll call land application of what they're doing, irrigating with that Class B water. And I asked him why they hadn't gone to Class A water, and he just said there hadn't been the need yet, and the cost would be more significant, but they are looking at doing ultraviolet treatment at the end of the process, which would meet the Class A requirements, so that they would have more flexibility in what they could do with that water supply.
Okay, any other questions for Matt? Okay, we'll have you coordinate with staff and we'll find a committee that wants to meet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we still good to go? All right, Mr. Director, welcome to our meeting. Thank you. Appreciate you making the trip with us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, there are a number of subjects that I want to discuss with you this morning. The first is I have been immersed in almost single focused on a subject of a delivery call by the Surface Water Coalition against groundwater users in Eastern Snake Plain for about the last 2 to 3 months. And maybe just a brief review of the history might be helpful for some of the board members. So the delivery call or the petition was filed with the director of the Department of Water Resources in 2005. And so we've been involved in this delivery call for approximately 18 years, and those who have been close to it, probably particularly Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Raybould perhaps have endured that long history. And I've seen a good share of it. So there have been multiple hearings following the delivery call. There have been multiple appeals through the courts and decisions that have been handed down by the courts. And one of those decisions was handed down, or a couple of them, in the 2014 timeframe, 2015. And because of that decision, we had to modify the standards by which we were evaluating the possibility of injury to the Surface Water Coalition. And let me just, for those of you who may not know, the Surface Water Coalition is comprised of 7 surface water delivery entities that divert water above the Milner Dam and deliver water, a good share of the surface water, out of the lower Snake River, what we call the lower upper Snake River, and really from the Rupert Burley area on down to Twin Falls, and then some of the extended areas take water all the way to Gooding and on the south side clear almost to well in the Hagerman area, and so Buell Hagerman. So those water users hold water rights of early priority, and those priority dates predate most, if not all, of the groundwater rights and their respective priorities. Anyway, I go back to 2014, 2015, and in implementing some of those changes, Matt Weaver and I actually walked over and met with then Senate Pro Tem Brent Hill and Speaker Scott Bedke and said, we anticipate that in the upcoming summer, I think that was 2015, there will be a significant shortfall that will result in substantial curtailment of groundwater rights. And because of that, there was an urgency, and I think, as I recall, Speaker Bedke and Senator Bear in particular worked very hard with water users. And there was an agreement that was struck in 2015, which was later adopted as a mitigation plan. And there also was a what we call a methodology order that was issued in 2016 that described processes by which we would predict early season whether there would be a demand shortfall by the Surface Water Coalition, and if there was a demand shortfall, then what the obligations might be of the groundwater users, either in mitigation or curtailment. And this 2015 agreement really replaced or was supposed to replace the extreme ends of either a great deal of water being available or a real deficiency. And there were standards that were established both for the amount of water that would be supplied every year, reductions in water use, and also some targeted aquifer levels. And everybody thought things were going great, and through 2 or 3 years of good water years, and then we've had a couple of bad water years, and then during those bad water years, then there was at least from the department's perspective, as we looked at the mitigation plan and the background contracts, there was a deficiency in satisfaction of the conditions of the mitigation plan. And that's being litigated at the present time and being appealed. But as a result of all of that turmoil, I decided to go review again the provisions of that methodology order. So that kind of takes us up to the present time because the water use has changed off across the Eastern Snake Plain. And I think everybody will attest that the crops that are being grown are more water consumptive, that there's a lot more forage being grown across the plain. And as a result, those conditions have changed the water use patterns. And we needed to build that into what I call the methodology order. So we scheduled a series of meetings starting in fall of 2022 with the various water user groups, their experts. I think there were 7 meetings that were conducted. And then in April, I issued an amended methodology order, and I scheduled a hearing for June 6th through the 10th. And all of the users, well, the groundwater users were unhappy with that schedule. It was taken up to Judge Wildman. And Judge Wildman says, given the circumstances, given the fact that the director is required to administer water rights timely, scheduling this hearing, even though it's expedited, is not unreasonable, and sent it back to me. So I held the hearing and it lasted 4 days, and we had a dozen attorneys or maybe a few more in attendance over the 4 days, and a number of extra witnesses. And based on that testimony and the record that was created, then yesterday, the day before, on the 19th, I issued 3 orders, which was a revised methodology order that didn't change much, an as-applied order for this year. By the way, I need to back up because in April, we determined that there was a deficiency
So a demand shortfall of 75,000, approximately, I think it's 75,200 acre feet. And that resulted in a curtailment date of 1953. Now, I need to get into the details a little bit, but really the most important components change in the methodology order was we changed what we call a baseline year, which is a year we select to then determine some prediction. So to predict what the water supply will be, I'm sorry, it's not supply, the actual demand for water will be. And that analogous year or that baseline year changed. And the reason for the change was, at least our conclusion is because of the change in water use across the plain. And so we identified a different baseline year, which will then predict a higher demand by the Surface Water Coalition members. And the supply is determined by data from the Heisey gauge on the South Fork and some other data, some of it related to spring flows and groundwater levels. So that takes us up to issuing the orders on the 19th. Of course, as we've been involved in it, and a lot of the department staff have contributed in analyzing data. And of course, we think it'll be a watershed moment. So Steve Stubner works on a press release, and Steve tells me this morning that we got no news coverage. And part of the reason is that we issued an as-applied order that determined, based on the first half of the year now, that there is no obligation. So there was a 75,000 acre foot shortfall in April, and that's predictive. So that's looking into the future, trying to use the baseline year of 2018 and saying, what will the actual use be? And if you remember, we had a fairly cool spring and quite a bit of precip across the plain, and the season has been a little later. And I think that's the reason there's a determination of no shortfall mid-season now. So maybe it's a yawner to everybody, and perhaps it won't even be appealed through the courts. And I think that's it. But anyway, here we are, and now we've got to go through the rest of the year. And our guess is, at least internally, that given how hot it is, and given probably the increase in water use this year, our guess is that there probably will be some obligation upcoming at the time of need and ultimately at the end of the season. But anyway, right now, Steve Stubner, I guess, wrote a press release that was just perfect, because nobody seems excited about it right now. Maybe they're exhausted. I don't know. But we certainly are in working with this. But the other real change in the methodology order, and I need to tell you this, is that in past determinations of a curtailment date, and we use the groundwater model to do this, in determining that curtailment date, we have looked at a steady state model run, and which means that we're really looking off into the future when the full impacts of a continuous activity are realized. And that's the way the curtailment date was established. So it only would contribute to the Surface Water Coalition a fraction of the shortfall in a given year when there is a shortfall. And my reading after court cases and decisions that have come out, either coincidental or at the same time as the 2015-2016 period of time up through now, the courts have clearly, I think, stated that seniors are entitled to their water in time, in place, and in quantity. And so we are now employing, instead of a steady state model run, a transient model run with And that transient will run then will tell us how many rights need to be curtailed in the season to supply that water to the seniors. And that's what I would call a watershed change in the methodology order. And that's caused a lot of the anxiety. And I am told that the governors received a letter signed by 24 legislators in Eastern Idaho questioning my sanity, and I'll take that, that's fine. But it is the subject of, I think, real turmoil in the future, and probably will be a subject of attempted legislation in the next legislative session. So that takes us to now, I think, a subject that I haven't heard discussed, although I didn't catch all of the work session yesterday, but in response to this letter and the anticipated backlash from my order, the governor has determined that he wants to sponsor a water summit. I don't know whether that's been discussed here at the board meeting, Brian, but it's scheduled for the 7th, and the board, of course, is responsible. And I think that's the right assignment, even though Brian and staff may not want to take it on, but it really is a future planning endeavor from my perspective of looking at the future of water supplies. And my understanding is that the agenda is statewide, so it will cover not only the Eastern Snake Plain, which may be the initial focus, but we'll also focus on many of the other basins in the state. It's a day-long, and I don't know whether the board, I'm sorry, maybe I'm covering ground that's already been covered, Brian or Jeff. I apologize if that's the case, but I think it's important at least to get this information.
You're okay. Yes.
So I don't know how many of the board members may want to participate or are planning to. The other little piece in this is the governor has also asked that the department begin negotiations for and this may be familiar particularly to Member McMahon and probably Mr. Olmstead and Mr. Stevenson, because they participated, but and as did Member Barker, but in the development of a groundwater management area plan or a groundwater management plan for the Eastern Snake Plain. And the responsibility for facilitating those discussions and forming a committee has been given to James Cephalo of the department in Eastern Region. And perhaps James is viewed as a more neutral player given the involvement of all of us in the disputes that have been ongoing. And so he is now trying to put together a steering committee or an advisory committee. And if those who participated in the Wood River matter can remember, we struggled and had a little bit of difficulty selecting an advisory committee and trying to limit it to a number that was manageable. And I think the challenge for James Cephalo is to select a committee that represents all of the diverse and varied interests across the Eastern Snake Plain and limit it to the number of people that's manageable. And they're trying to keep it at a number of 10 or a dozen, and we'll see whether they're successful or not. But I think the board, if the board isn't aware of it, should know that that's happening in the background as well. There are a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. Last time I reported, I talked about staffing and staff. So I am happy to report that we were able to award staff raises between, and I want to say the range was between 4.5% and 6.5%, I think was the range. I haven't looked at it recently, but a good share of staff received a raise in the range of 5 to 5.5% or 5 to 6% in that range, which I was happy about because that exceeds what the state had really appropriated for raises. And the other little piece is that we were able to hand out a few extra bonuses to staff this year because of a little excess cash and maybe some one-time considerations that we may not be able to get in the future. But anyway, from the standpoint of compensation, we were able to give money to staff. I do want to mention though, and I don't know whether this has come up, but we have lost some engineers. And I don't know whether Brian or Cynthia, this has been discussed with board members, but board staff has been hit particularly hard, I think, by these departures. We've lost 2 engineers, as I am told, within the last couple of months out of the board staff. And so you're shorthanded, and you know, we can only lean on Mike and Cynthia for so long, Brian. We really need that technical help in the background, and I don't know how we can track those people and keep them. And the folks who left have specific reasons, but anyway, I think the board needs to know with some sobriety that we lost 2 pretty good folks who we were bringing up, and they're gone or will be. I don't think Eric's going in.
Last day today.
Today's departure. The last subject I just wanted to touch on is something that's happening in northern Idaho and may be of interest, but there is continued work ongoing in the Bunker Hill area and the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene, and the question of whether EPA and all of that work needs a water right for rerouting a stream, diverting it out of stream, and then removing material, whether they need a water right or not, has come up again. This subject was raised during Governor Otter's administration, and at the time, the folks up there were demanding that Governor Otter require EPA to obtain a water right. And EPA claims federal preemption over state sovereignty regarding this through the CERCLA Act. And what finally happened, and Governor Otter was promising that EPA would have to comply with state law, but didn't, I think, wisely tell people that they had to get a water right. We struck a memorandum of understanding with EPA. I remember a delegation and Senator Broadsword, who was up here representing folks in the Sandpoint to Coeur d'Alene area, and went over there with the head of DEQ. And anyway, EPA agreed to sign an MOU that would at least protect senior water right holders. And the particular project that's up right now is called the Star Complex. It's a drainage that's tributary and goes north out of the South Fork, and I guess all of the material that's the stream channel right now is comprised, I think, primarily of dredge material. They plan to just remove all of that and restore the stream, but in doing so, they'll have to divert water out for about a 6-mile reach. So anyway, I thought the board, we're in the throes now of trying to strike another agreement with EPA regarding water use. And I thought the board might be interested in that subject, just because we always have these continued issues of whether the federal government is required to obtain a water right or not. And that is an underlying issue even with Dvorak Reservoir and some of what happens there. So it's still an issue that bubbles up and confronts us on occasion. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spackman. Any questions for the director? Again, thanks for journeying up this way with us and being present in our meetings. We appreciate you. Okay, the next item, non-action items for discussion. Dale, do you have anything?
I'm good.
Mark?
No, please, no, thank you.
Dean? Ryan?
I've got just one item, a little Well, hopefully good news for Wesley. Luke Hicks, Committee 9 member on the Great Peter South Fork, right, Jeff? He has a friend who's a big gravel operator, and he's got this gravel operator friend has an 80-acre gravel pit that he's going to retire this year. And so I just got a message from Luke that they would like to do a tour up there for some waterboard, and West knows who it is and where it is, I believe. So it says it's 40 feet deep and 80 acres and fairly a ways to groundwater. So it sounds like maybe a good spot to get some upper valley recharge, hopefully.
Hopefully adjacent to an existing canal. Close by.
I think actually adjacent to Luke's canal.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're there, right?
Okay.
And we haven't lined that canal yet. So.
Pat.
I have nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Al?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, one of the things we were hoping to take on this year was a review of the state water plan for our 50th anniversary. Given the work that's been going on in the ESPA and the governor's call for a water summit, it seemed prudent for us to postpone what the planning would be until after we get the feedback from the governor's summit and the people who are there. So looks like we're not going to be in a position to do anything in the way of updating the state water plan for the next step.
Okay, I think that's appropriate. I think it's a wise decision. So we'll see what we learn on the 7th of August. We'll all be smarter.
I'm sure we'll hear lots of things that we've heard before and maybe hopefully some new things.
Yeah. Okay. Joanne.
I have nothing.
Okay. Brian.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just want to run through your upcoming meetings. August is looking to be a fairly busy month for you. It's usually a downtime. First, next week, July 25th, you have an Aquifer Stabilization Committee scheduled. I believe that's on Tuesday. Fairly busy agenda with that one. It will be the rollout of what happened with Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer storage levels, our annual update of that. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some Treasure Valley modeling scenarios that are currently being initiated with the Treasure Valley groundwater model. August 7th, as Director Spagman mentioned, is the Governor's Water Summit. I think you all have at this point have seen a draft version of that agenda, and many of you have either speaking roles or panel moderating roles. So have been assigned those roles by the governor's office. If you have any concerns about those, please let me know. August 28th and 29th is the Idaho Water Users Association Water College. This year will be focused in the Magic Valley area in Burley, I believe. As you know, the Idaho Water Users is moving to make this an annual event, and they will rotate that event to different locations around the state. So I think it's a good effort. And I know some of you are planning to attend. If you are planning to attend and have not yet let Jennifer know that, please do so she can make those arrangements. There will also likely be a special board meeting in August for a couple of reasons, including allocating construction money to finish the Priest Lake project, as we heard earlier from Mike Morrison. That date has not yet been scheduled, and we will be working to schedule that as those plans come together. And then September 14 and 15 is your next regularly scheduled board meeting. That's scheduled for Salmon, and the meeting will be held at the Sacagawea Center just outside of town. And Jennifer will be in touch with more information on accommodations and schedule in the coming month or so.
Okay, lots to do. Okay, any questions for Mr. Patton about our schedule? I think there's only one thing left to do. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh. Director Spagnon.
Mr. Chairman, I want to correct some of what I said, and I did not acknowledge, I think, one professional person here, so I want to acknowledge Wes Hipke. And Wes, I'm sorry I overlooked you in the list of those who we rely on for your technical expertise in engineering. And anyway, I want to acknowledge Wes's hard work.
Thank you. I'm not sure that anonymity isn't what staff is striving for through this process, but
I didn't want to leave somebody out. I realized that once. I apologize.
thank you. Yeah. Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We are adjourned until the next meeting. We've had a good trip to Moscow. And